Riverside Park was quiet that Sunday morning, golden light cutting through the elm trees, leaves catching the October wind when Marcus Webb stopped breathing. Noah was already there, standing before a woman on the bench like he had all the time in the world, wool coat-pressed coffee cup cooling in her hand, her eyes fixed somewhere no one else could reach. The boy folded his hands behind his back, tilted his chin up, and spoke with the quiet gravity of someone twice his age. "Excuse me, ma'am. Would you be my mommy just for today?" Marcus knew how this ended. An awkward smile, a murmured apology, a woman walking away. Then the cup slipped. Coffee bloomed across cold stone like a wound reopening. She didn't move. She looked at Noah the way people look at the one thing they've spent years trying to forget. Marcus stopped running. This morning was only the beginning. He had rehearsed the apology before he even reached the bench. Marcus Webb had a system for these moments, the same one he'd developed over the past month, ever since Noah started approaching strangers in the park with that particular look in his eyes. You apologize quickly, you take your son by the hand. You explain on the walk home that not everyone is available to be asked that kind of question. It was a reasonable system. It had worked 4 times already, but the woman hadn't walked away. She was still sitting there, her coffee spreading in a slow, dark bloom across the stone at her feet, and she was looking at Noah the way Marcus hadn't seen anyone look at his son since the last time Diana held him. "Sir, I'm so sorry." Marcus crouched down and began collecting the larger shards of ceramic with his bare hands. "He does this. I'm working on it. Noah, come here." Noah didn't move. The woman's eyes hadn't left the boy's face. Up close, Marcus could see she was somewhere in her mid-30s, dressed simply enough dark slacks, a charcoal coat that had probably cost more than his monthly grocery bill. But there was something pulled tight behind her expression, like a door being held shut from the inside. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't annoyed. She looked, if anything, like someone who had just been struck by something they hadn't braced for. She set the broken handle carefully on the bench beside her, then looked at Noah with a directness that surprised Marcus. "What would you need a mother for?" she asked. Not unkindly, genuinely. Noah considered this with the gravity he applied to all serious questions, the same expression he wore when deciding between dinosaur shapes at breakfast. He looked down at his shoes for a moment, then back up at her. "To tie the hair on my teddy bear, because my dad doesn't know how to do it right, and she always looks sad when it's crooked." The woman stared at him. Then she laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh, or a charmed, oh how sweet laugh. It was the kind that escapes before you can catch it, sudden and unguarded, like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time, and finally found a way out. She pressed one hand briefly to her mouth, and in that unguarded second, Marcus saw something cross her face that he couldn't name, something between pain and relief that had no clean translation. He stood there with a fistful of broken ceramic and understood with quiet certainty that this was not a conversation he could end with an apology. Her name, she offered eventually, was Catherine. No last name. She didn't ask for his either, and somehow that felt like an agreement rather than an oversight. They stayed at the park. Marcus wasn't sure how it happened one moment. He was calculating the fastest way to extract Noah without causing a scene, and the next moment, he was sitting on the opposite end of the bench while Noah walked Catherine through the detailed personal history of every dinosaur in his backpack. She listened with her whole body leaned slightly forward, asking questions that made Noah's eyes go wide. Which one is faster? Do you think they were friends? What did they eat when they couldn't find meat? Marcus watched from the corner of his eye and said very little. He had spent 18 months filling space, every morning, every evening, every weekend, at Riverside Park that had once belonged to 3 people and now belonged to 2. He knew how to be present. He had become, out of necessity, very good at occupying the shape of both parents, at once the one who remembered which cup Noah liked, which nightlight needed to stay on, Which stuffed animal required a ribbon in her hair that he could never quite get right. He was good at all of it. He was exhausted by all of it in a way that had no bottom. But sitting here, watching his son talk to a stranger who somehow already knew to take him seriously, Marcus felt something shift very slightly in his chest, like a knot releasing, like a breath drawn all the way in. He didn't examine it. He just let it be. The afternoon moved the way October afternoons do in New York, generous with its light, until suddenly, it isn't. The sun dropped behind the tree line, and the air sharpened, and somewhere in the hour before dark, Noah climbed up onto the bench between them, talked himself quiet, and fell asleep. His head came to rest on Catherine's shoulder. She went very still. Marcus watched her look down at his son, this 5-year-old boy she had known for less than an afternoon, and the expression on her face was not the soft, sentimental look of a stranger charmed by a sleeping child. It was something older and quieter than that, something that looked to Marcus like recognition, like a person who had been searching for something they couldn't name and had suddenly, unexpectedly found its shape. He didn't ask about it. Whatever she was carrying, it wasn't his to open. He reached over and tucked Noah's jacket more firmly around his shoulders, and when he looked up, Catherine was watching him with an expression he couldn't read either. They sat like that for a while, the three of them on one bench in the fading light, and the city moved around them without asking permission. Noah stirred as the streetlights came on. He blinked, looked up, and took stock of the situation with the calm practicality of a child who finds it perfectly reasonable to wake from sleep on a park bench between two adults. He looked at Catherine. "Are you coming back next week?" Marcus opened his mouth. The reasonable answer was already forming. "She's a stranger, buddy. She has her own life. We can't just—" "Yes," he said. The word was out before the thought completed. He felt Catherine glance at him, and he looked straight ahead at the tree line, and didn't take it back. Noah accepted this with a nod, the way he accepted most things that made sense to him, and began the important work of locating his backpack. Catherine stood and helped him with the zipper, and her hands were steady, and she did not make it strange. When Noah finally ran ahead toward the park exit, Marcus stood beside her on the path. "You don't have to," he said, a belated offering the closest he could come to a retraction. Catherine looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said simply, and she walked away before he could say anything else, just that nothing more, no qualifier or explanation. And Marcus watched her go, a woman in a charcoal coat disappearing into the early dark, and he understood that he had just opened a door he didn't fully understand. He wasn't sure he wanted to close it. He thought about Diana on the walk home. He thought about her most days in the ordinary way of someone who has lost a person, who was woven into the structure of everything, not in waves of grief anymore, not like the first months, but in the smaller moments. The specific absence of her voice in the apartment on Sunday nights, the way Noah sometimes still set 3 cups on the table out of habit before catching himself. The ribbon Marcus kept in the kitchen drawer, the one he'd been tying and retying for a year and a half, trying to get it right. Diana would have laughed at the teddy bear answer. She would have thought it was exactly the kind of thing Noah would say, and she would have been right, and she would have loved him all the more for it. Marcus held Noah's hand and thought, "I am not replacing anything." He had said this to himself before other times, other contexts. He had meant it each time. He meant it now, too. He just wasn't entirely sure what he was doing instead. Noah looked up at him as they turned onto their block, the city noise folding around them. "Do you think she'll actually come?" Noah asked. Marcus looked down at his son, this small, serious, open-hearted person who had walked up to a stranger on a bench and asked for something he needed, with no apology and no hesitation. Marcus had spent 18 months trying to be everything. Noah had spent one afternoon finding something Marcus hadn't thought to look for. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I think she will." Noah seemed satisfied. He looked ahead and walked on, and Marcus followed, and the door stayed open behind them both. She came back the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and the one after that. By November, it had stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a calendar. Catherine at the park at 10 in the morning. Noah already watching the entrance from the bench, where Marcus had given up pretending he wasn't watching too. She always brought coffee. She always remembered that Marcus took his black. She always crouched to Noah's level when he spoke to her, never talked down, never rushed him through a thought. She was the most present person Marcus had ever met, and also somehow the most absent. He noticed it in the small ways first. Noah would mention something a neighbor's dog, a dream he'd had the name of his best friend at school, and Catherine would remember it the following week, perfectly unprompted. But when Noah asked her where she lived, she said not far and moved on. When Marcus asked casually about her week, she answered in the shape of feelings rather than facts. She always paid for things in cash. She always left before 5, with reasons that were never quite specific enough to question and never quite vague enough to challenge. There was a wall there. Marcus had learned to recognize walls he'd built enough of his own over the past 18 months. He chose not to push against hers. He told himself it was because whatever she was carrying was hers to carry. He told himself it was because Noah was happy. That part at least was simply true. Noah had started calling her Mama Catherine somewhere in the 3rd week, the way children rename things to fit their internal world casually, without ceremony, as if the word had always belonged to her. Marcus had braced himself for Catherine to correct it. She hadn't. She'd looked at Noah for a long moment with an expression Marcus couldn't see clearly from where he sat, and then she'd asked what his teddy bear's name was, and the conversation had moved on. That night, for the first time since Diana died, Noah slept through until morning without waking. Marcus stood in the doorway of his son's room at 2 a.m. and listened to the silence where the crying used to be and didn't know what to do with any of it. It was a Tuesday in November when everything shifted. They didn't usually see each other on weekdays, but Catherine had texted one of the few personal details she'd offered a phone number with no contact name attached, asking if Noah wanted to meet at the park after school. Marcus had said yes before thinking about it, which was becoming a habit he hadn't decided how to feel about. Noah came off the school bus flushed and quieter than usual. By the time they reached the park, he was leaning against Marcus's side, with the particular boneless weight of a child whose body is shutting down for maintenance. His forehead, when Marcus pressed his palm to it, was burning. Okay. Marcus already had his phone out and was calculating pediatrician cap. The car was at the garage until Thursday, how long the subway would take with a sick child and a backpack full of plastic dinosaurs. Okay, let's go. Catherine was already moving. She had her own phone to her ear, speaking in a low, precise voice Marcus didn't catch. He was focused on Noah, on getting the backpack situated, on not showing the particular flavor of panic that lived just below his surface on days when something went wrong, and he was the only person responsible for fixing it. 4 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the park entrance. Marcus stared at it. Then he looked at Catherine. "It's faster," she said simply. "He needs to be seen tonight, not in 2 hours." Inside the car, Noah fell asleep against Marcus's arm before they reached the first intersection. Catherine sat on the other side, and her phone kept lighting up on her knee, silent but persistent. Marcus glanced over once and registered the name on the screen before he could choose not to Board of Directors hail Tech. She declined the call without looking at him. They didn't speak until Noah was settled in a room at the pediatric clinic for his small arm, already drifting into the medicated sleep that would break his fever by morning. Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed. Catherine stood near the window with her arms crossed, watching Noah with that familiar expression, still focused, like a person keeping guard. "Catherine Hale," Marcus said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. She turned to look at him. CEO of Hale Technologies. It wasn't a question, and they both knew it. She held his gaze and didn't deny it didn't qualify. It didn't reach for an explanation immediately. She just waited, which Marcus was beginning to understand was one of her instincts. Not silence as evasion, but silence as respect, she told him then. Measured direct. The board had flagged her performance in the spring, not the work over the work, but the person doing it. The signs of someone running on a deficit they couldn't sustain. They had structured a leave of absence that was in practice non-negotiable. 6 months beginning in July. She was to be unreachable. She was to rest. She had not known what to do with the concept of rest, so she had walked. Every morning, different neighborhoods, different parks. She'd ended up at Riverside the first week, and kept going back because it was quiet, in a way the city usually wasn't. She hadn't planned to talk to anyone. She certainly hadn't planned for a 5-year-old to walk up and restructure her entire morning. Marcus listened without speaking. When she finished, he looked at his son, the rise and fall of that small chest, the ribbon still tied crookedly in the stuffed bear's hair, because Catherine had tried 3 times and claimed she'd gotten it right, and Noah had accepted this diplomatic fiction with grace, and he felt the anger come in anyway. "He's not a therapy exercise," Marcus said. "My son is not something you work through on your way back to yourself." Catherine didn't flinch. "I know that." "Then why didn't you say any of this 3 weeks ago, a month ago?" "Because I didn't know how to." She said it without defensiveness, which somehow made it harder to stay angry at. "And because by the time I understood what was happening, I was already..." She stopped. "What's real between Noah and me," she said carefully. "I need you to tell me that it isn't. Look at him and tell me what I feel for that child is just self-medication." Marcus looked at his son. He said nothing, because he couldn't, and they both knew he couldn't, and the anger didn't disappear so much as it ran out of room to move. 2 weeks after that night, a photograph appeared online. Marcus saw it on his phone while Noah was brushing his teeth, a candid shot slightly blurred at the edges, taken from a distance with a long lens. Catherine was crouched in the grass at the edge of the park, helping Noah dig something out of the dirt with a stick. She was laughing. Noah was explaining something with both hands. It was an ordinary moment, and it was everywhere within 48 hours. Wall Street's most powerful CEO finds weekend hobby other people's children. The coverage was the kind that moves fast and asks questions later. The stock fluctuation was noted. The board's emergency statement was noted. Catherine Hale, photographed in an unguarded moment, maternal and unrecognizable, was noted and shared and analyzed until it had no resemblance to the actual afternoon from which it had been stolen. Then the tabloid piece ran. Marcus found it at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night after Noah was asleep. It was the kind of article that dressed cruelty in the language of concerned sources close to the company questions raised by observers. The headline asked whether Catherine Hale, having suffered the loss of a premature baby girl 18 months ago, was now seeking a replacement. Marcus read the sentence twice. 18 months ago. He did the math without wanting to. 18 months ago, he had been sitting in a different hospital room, holding Diana's hand through the last of it. 2 people losing something irreplaceable in the same month, in the same city, and never knowing the other existed. The symmetry of it was too precise to be anything except true. He sat with the information for a long time. He wasn't sure what he felt. Compassion moved through him, genuine and immediate. But underneath it was something colder, the recognition that Catherine had let him sit across from her for weeks, in conversation after conversation, about loss and grief and the shape a family takes after something breaks it, and she had never said a word. Not one word. And now he was learning it from a tabloid that had dressed her grief up as a scandal. He closed the phone and looked at the dark window for a while. He told himself he understood why people kept things. He told himself this with the authority of someone who had become over the past 1.5 years quite expert at it. It didn't make the silence feel smaller. By the following Sunday, her number rang out. The week after that, it was disconnected. Noah asked every day the first week, the way children do factually without accusation, just needing the information. Where is Mama Catherine? Is she coming? Did something happen? Marcus gave him the answers available. She had some things to figure out. She would be in touch, when she could. Sometimes grown-ups needed time. The second week, Noah stopped asking. He started taking Diana's photograph down from the shelf more often, the framed one from their last summer. Diana laughing at something off-camera hair, loose entirely herself. Noah would carry it to the couch and sit with it in his lap, not crying, not speaking, just looking. The way you look at an inventory, the way you count the people who have been present and are no longer. Marcus watched his son do this and felt something that had a clean name. Helplessness was part of it. The rest of it was a specific kind of grief, not for Diana, not exactly, but for the look on Noah's face, which was the look of a child learning for the second time to absorb an absence. He kept the television off. But late one night, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come, he found himself remembering what the board had said in their public statement. Something about Catherine undergoing an internal review, and he found himself thinking about what the television psychologist had said before he turned it off about attachment, about grief, displacement, about people who borrow other people's families when their own pain becomes unlivable. He thought about the SUV, the name on the phone, the way she'd left every Sunday before 5 without quite explaining why. He thought about Noah on the couch with Diana's photograph. And for the first time since October, Marcus Webb allowed himself to wonder, had any of it been real? Or had he and his son simply been for one season a warm place for someone else to stand? He didn't have an answer. And the not knowing in its own way was the most exhausting thing he'd felt in months. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after her number went dead. There was no return address. Marcus almost didn't open it. He'd learned over the past month and a half a kind of discipline around hope, the same way you learn not to reach for a light switch in a room where the bulb is gone. But something about the handwriting on the front stopped him, his name in careful block letters. Not a bill, not a form. Inside were 2 things. The first was a drawing. Marcus recognized immediately. Noah had made it on a Sunday in late October, during one of those afternoons, when the light was good, and Catherine had produced a small set of colored pencils from her coat pocket, the way she sometimes produced exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. 3 figures in front of a row of elm trees, rendered in the particular style of a 5-year-old, who takes his subject seriously. 1 tall, 1 small one in between. Beneath them, in Noah's careful oversized letters, Dad, me, and Mama Catherine. Marcus had watched Noah present it to her that afternoon. Catherine had folded it with both hands and tucked it into her coat pocket like it was something that needed protecting. The second was a single handwritten note, small paper, no header. I don't deserve to keep this, but I don't have the courage to return it in person. Please find a way to explain it to Noah that hurts him as little as possible. Marcus read it once. Then he set it on the kitchen counter and stood very still for a moment, looking at the drawing. The anger he'd expected didn't come. What came instead was something sharper and more specific, the recognition of a particular kind of self-destruction he understood better than he wanted to. He had seen it in the mirror the year Diana was sick. The way a person in pain can convince themselves that leaving is the kindest available option, that their absence is a gift to the people they love, that the most honest thing they can do is remove themselves before they cause more damage. It felt like clarity. It felt like sacrifice. It was neither. Catherine was punishing herself with the only currency she had left: distance, and she was dressing it up as consideration for Noah, and Marcus was not going to let her. He left the note on the counter. He kept the drawing. Getting a message to someone who has gone unreachable is not complicated when you are a structural engineer who has spent 20 years solving problems by working out which load-bearing elements cannot be removed. Catherine's law firm had a public address. Marcus wrote one letter, 2 paragraphs printed on paper he borrowed from Noah's art supplies, because it was the only paper in the apartment that felt proportionate to what he was trying to say. Noah drew this for you, not for Catherine Hale, not for the woman who lost someone. For you, the person who knows how to tie a ribbon in a teddy bear's hair and took it seriously enough to try 3 times. You have every right to decide you can't do this, but you don't have the right to decide for Noah that you're not worth coming back to. That's his call, not yours. He folded the drawing inside the letter, sealed the envelope, and walked it to the post office himself. Then he waited. He was good at waiting. He had learned it the hard way. 3 days later, at 2:55 in the afternoon, Marcus was standing at the school gate when he saw her. She had come by taxi. He registered this first. No SUV, no tinted windows, nothing that announced itself. Just a yellow cab pulling to the curb half a block down, and Catherine stepping out in a coat he hadn't seen before, darker and older than the charcoal one, the kind of coat a person reaches for when they are not thinking about being looked at. Her hair was down. She was holding the drawing with both hands, the paper slightly creased from where she'd been gripping it, and she was walking toward the school gate with the careful, deliberate pace of someone who has made a decision and is not allowing themselves to slow down long enough to reconsider. She saw Marcus. She stopped a few feet away. The drawing was still in her hands. He looked at her, really looked the way he hadn't allowed himself to in the weeks of silence. She looked like someone who had been through something and hadn't slept enough on the other side of it. She looked like herself, only less fortified, less held together by the invisible architecture of control that had surrounded her in the early weeks. He didn't know whether that was better or worse. He thought it was probably just true. "I resigned this morning," she said. Marcus studied her face. "For the company, or for us?" Catherine met his eyes and held them. "For me," she said. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, just for me." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the woman who had shown up every Sunday with cash and no last name, and reasons for leaving that were never quite complete. He thought about the person who had listened to Noah with her whole body, who had tried 3 times to get a ribbon, right? Who had held a sleeping child on a park bench in October with the expression of someone discovering something they had no words for. He thought about the note on his kitchen counter, the particular grammar of someone who believes their own disappearance is an act of love. He thought people don't resign their lives for other people unless something has already shifted past the point of returning. He didn't say any of that. He just nodded once and moved aside so she could see the school entrance. The doors opened at 3 o'clock exactly. Children came out in the uneven wave. They always do some running, some dragging, some already deep in arguments that had apparently begun in the classroom and were not yet resolved. Marcus watched Noah emerge near the middle of the group backpack, enormous on his small frame, looking down at something in his hand that turned out to be a dinosaur he'd apparently carried through an entire school day. Noah looked up. He saw Catherine. He went very still. 2 full seconds, the kind of stillness that is not confusion, but calibration. A child making absolutely certain that what he is seeing is real and not a trick of wanting. His eyes moved between her and Marcus once, and Marcus gave him nothing but a steady look that said, yes, this is happening. It's real. Noah ran, not carefully, not with the cautious approach of someone who has learned to moderate their expectations. He ran the way children run toward things they love, without any of the protection adults learn to layer over that impulse. And he hit Catherine at full speed with his arms already open, and she caught him. She went down to one knee on the pavement and held his son, and Marcus watched her close her eyes, and he looked away, because some things are not meant to be witnessed from the outside. Noah didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't ask why. He was 5, nearly 6, and somewhere in the architecture of his understanding, the question of why people left had already been answered as many times as he could absorb, and what mattered now was the specific gravity of being held by someone who had come back. After a while, Noah pulled back just far enough to look at her face. He reached up with one hand and patted her cheek twice with the solemn gentleness he usually reserved for injured animals and newly purchased dinosaurs. "Your coat is different," he said. Catherine laughed. It was the same laugh as the first day, the one that escaped before she could catch it, and Marcus felt something in his chest that had been held at a particular tension for 6 weeks release all at once, like a cable finally cut. "I know," she said. "Do you like it?" Noah considered. "It's okay," he said charitably. The other one was better. They walked to the park together that afternoon, all three, the long way the route that took them past the bakery Noah had opinions about. Nobody talked about the 6 weeks. Nobody talked about board meetings or tabloid articles or handwritten notes in unmarked envelopes. Those things existed. They would need to be spoken about carefully in the time that followed, in the ongoing conversation between two adults trying to build something without a blueprint. But not that afternoon. That afternoon, Noah walked between them with a hand in each of theirs and explained at length why the Ankylosaurus was underrated and the city moved around them the way it always did, indifferent and magnificent. And the light came through the elm trees the way it had in October. At the bench, their bench by habit, Noah climbed up and immediately began unpacking his backpack with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting all day to do exactly this. Catherine sat beside him, and Marcus sat on the other side, and the park settled into its late afternoon quiet. Catherine reached into the pocket of her old coat and produced a small roll of ribbon, dark blue, narrow the right width, and set it on the bench between herself and Noah without comment. Noah looked at it. Then he looked at her. "I practiced," Catherine said simply. Noah retrieved his teddy bear from the bottom of the backpack with the gravity the moment deserved. He handed it over. Catherine turned the bear in her hands, worked the ribbon through carefully, and tied it with a precision that was Marcus could see the product of someone who had actually genuinely sat somewhere over the past 6 weeks and taught herself to do this correctly. Noah inspected it. He turned the bear's head left, then right. The ribbon held. "It's good," he said, with the judicial authority of someone whose standards were not subject to negotiation. Catherine handed the bear back. "Good," she said. Marcus said nothing. He was looking at the tree line at the last of the light moving through the branches and thinking about a Sunday in October when he had run across a park trying to stop something he didn't understand, and how the thing he'd been running toward had turned out to be the thing he'd been afraid of, and the thing he'd been afraid of had turned out to be the most ordinary thing in the world. 2 people sitting on a bench, a child between them. The specific, unspectacular miracle of showing up. He thought about Diana the way he always did in the park in the particular texture of late afternoon light. He thought, "I am not replacing anything." He had said this to himself many times over the past months, and each time he had meant it, and each time it had felt like it needed defending. It didn't need defending anymore. What was here was not a replacement. It was not a solution or a remedy or a stand-in for something lost. It was simply what had grown in the space between a broken coffee cup and a ribbon tied correctly on the 4th attempt, specific and new and entirely its own. He thought Diana would have found Catherine maddening and compelling in roughly equal measure, and would probably have liked her enormously within the month. He thought that felt right. A year later, their life looked like this. A larger apartment in Brooklyn, the 3rd floor of a brownstone with good windows, and a corner that caught morning light, which Noah had claimed immediately for drawing. The walls of that corner were tacked with artwork in various stages of completion, dinosaurs mostly rendered with increasing anatomical ambition, and one large piece that showed 3 people standing in front of a row of trees that were clearly meant to be elms. Sunday mornings had become the domain of cooking all 3 of them in the kitchen at once, which was somewhat chaotic and entirely deliberate. Catherine had opinions about the correct way to make pancakes that were in direct conflict with the method Marcus had used for years, and they had reached a compromise that satisfied neither of them, and that Noah declared the best pancakes he'd ever eaten, which resolved the debate permanently. Riverside Park on Sunday afternoons when the weather allowed. The bench, the elm trees, the specific light. Catherine was not a perfect mother. Marcus had understood fairly early that perfect was not the relevant measure. She was still occasionally too precise, still reached sometimes for strategy, when what was needed was simply presence. There were evenings when she stood in the kitchen doorway with the expression of someone calculating variables in a problem that didn't have variables, and Marcus would hand her a dish towel and find her a task that used her hands, and it helped, and she was learning. Marcus still sat sometimes late at night with Diana's photograph. Not in grief exactly. The grief had changed shape, as grief does become less like weather and more like terrain, something you learn to move through rather than wait for to pass. He sat with her the way you sit with someone who knew you before you became the person you are now, which is its own kind of comfort. Noah was 6. He had strong opinions about everything. A laugh that startled birds, and a teddy bear whose hair was tied every single night before bed, carefully correctly, with the dark blue ribbon Catherine had brought to the park on an afternoon in January. Every night without fail, he brought the bear to wherever Catherine was in the apartment, held it up, and waited for the verdict. And every night, Catherine looked at the bow with the full seriousness it deserved, turned the bear once in her hands, and said, "Perfect." This was the story that had started with a father running across a park, trying to reach his son before his son reached a stranger. Marcus had been certain in that moment that he was preventing something. It turned out that children sometimes can see clearly the things that adults have spent years learning to look away from the shape of what is missing the direction of what is needed. The particular bench where the right person is sitting with a coffee cup about to slip from her hand. Noah had seen it in under 30 seconds. Marcus had needed the whole year. He thought that was about right.